So we're continuing our look at the Southpaw essay on Spider-Man 2. Let me summarize very briefly and then we'll get to the meat of the issue. Essentially, he's trying to downgrade Spider-Man 2, which he feels has been unjustly elevated in the fandom by pointing out two prominent flaws that others have missed. I would assume people like myself who rely too much on the comic books and other media. But as we're going to see, there are some internal and external problems with the issues he brings to bear.
MJ was present when Harry and Peter had this exchange.
So where you been, pal? You don't return my calls.
I've been busy.
Peter is too busy to even keep up with his best friend, which anyone who doesn't know about his double life would just figure to be a natural effect of being a low-income college student with a job. Possibly even two. Oh, well, maybe she just doesn't know what his financial situation is. Bullshit! Literally, the last scene of the movie is her showing up at Peter's apartment without having to be told where it is at any point in the film. So it's safe to infer that she's known about the shitty apartment he's been living in this entire time, which should tell her fucking everything about how strapped he is financially, and in turn, how busy he would probably be just to make ends meet and how little money he has to blow on a ticket to a play. She should be aware of how busy he is, and he hasn't been able to make any commitments because of that, and it just so happened that something came up the one time he did. But
So his essential problem here is that MJ is morally questionable, and we know she's morally questionable because that's tied to his, quote, economic destitution, because we see clearly he struggles financially. Well, there are several problems here. For one thing, he actually appears to be in error in terms of how badly Peter is off. And let me acknowledge I'm getting some outside help, and I acknowledge that freely. I've gotten a lot of generous insight from other people. But I was already on this track, but it definitely helps to have some specifics where he just gets things wrong about, quote, Peter's poverty.
We know that Jameson did pay Peter for the pictures that he took, which is alluded to in their dialogue.
You serious? Pay you for what? Standing there? The planetarium tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. There's the door.
Granted, we don't know how much Peter got paid for the pictures that he took, but since the movies don't establish an upper limit to how much he did get paid, it's very plausible that Jameson paid Peter enough money for Peter to alleviate his financial hardships, to the point that Mr. Ditkovich wouldn't be on Peter's case every time he sees him for the rest of the movie's screen time. One might argue that Jameson, being the cheapskate that he is, wouldn't have paid Peter enough money, but we have seen Peter easily convince Jameson to increase his salary by twice the originally intended amount that Jameson would pay Peter, so Peter can do the same again.
I'll give you 150.
300.
That's outrageous. Done. Give this to the girl. Thank you. Bye-bye.
If he had paid much more close attention, yes, it's true to say that Spider-Man has limited resources. It's not quite correct to say he's destitute. He definitely has limited resources, but no, he does get money. He has money, and him jumping from, well, he's in a bad apartment, so MJ should be able to, quote, infer all these things is, well, that's just begging the question. Her state of knowledge is a little bit all over the place in Spider-Man 2, and that's a fair criticism that MJ could be manipulative. It's not a fair criticism to say she's manipulative and has to be very precisely aware of his economic situation, because you're not aware of precisely his economic situation. You got it wrong. That's going to detract from parts of this essay. He also comments on the power system, and he makes some curious remarks about how it does and doesn't work in Spider-Man 2. It brings up a self-defeating point.
detractors of this movie seem to list Peter's powers suddenly not working as an issue with the film, but personally, I don't agree. I'm not sure if Spider-Man's powers are usually linked to his state of mind in the comics, but even if this was made up for this adaptation of the character, it's a change that I don't really mind, as I don't think that an adaptation being 100% faithful to the source material is what makes it good. I mean, he already has webs coming out of his wrists instead of web shooters in this trilogy. And this particular rule set up in this movie doesn't seem to contradict anything from the
Now, I want to be careful. I don't think I know how much Southpaw does or doesn't know about Spider-Man. I'm going to be careful and not say he's a passive fan, but I would say he's a very biased fan. Because if he had double-checked the comics, this is not really much of a major issue. And I want to make a concession here myself. I had always assumed that with Spider-Man, his powers were basically biological. So he does lose his powers. He even gains powers in the comics. But I had thought it was strictly a biological issue and not a psychological issue. And I will admit I was mistaken because I thought the canon was fairly clear, but apparently it's a little bit more ambiguous.
Peter is having psychological distress and his powers aren't really affected, but to my knowledge, there has been one occasion where his powers are affected by his state of mind in the comics, specifically the Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1. In this story, Peter temporarily loses his powers due to his guilt over Uncle Ben's death, his lack of conviction to be Spider-Man, and his desire to live a normal life as a civilian, which is conveyed in these panels. His powers later return when Betty Brant and Aunt May have been kidnapped by the Sinister Six, and he confronts the Sinister Six in an effort to rescue Betty Brant and Aunt May. Although not explicitly stated, Peter's powers do seem dependent on his mental state in the story because they fade away when he expresses frustration with his powers and wishes that he never got them in the first place so that he could live a normal life as a civilian.
According to the comics, his mental states as well as his biology do play a role in whether he has more powers or less powers. Now, to be fair, he's not relying upon the comic books, but that's the whole point, is you're saying, I don't really even care if it is faithful to the comics. But here's the thing, it is faithful to the comics, or at least to a certain threads of it. So him just being generous and saying, well, I don't really care if the adaptation is, quote, 100% accurate, is really a nice way of saying, is he's basically very ignorant of Spider-Man and his history. I'm not going to comment on the comics, which is his prerogative, but other people can clearly and legitimately invoke that, and that would answer his initial question about MJ, because in the comics, he'd know for a fact Peter, yes, has done morally questionable things. He's done morally questionable things for money. We even see this in the film. He literally photographs himself, makes money from it, and that acts as self-serving propaganda, because in this universe, ironically, people like Spider-Man. He's very popular. He's even popular with women. And if you know the comics, he's done questionable things with female partners. He's had questionable relationships in alternative canons and in the main canon. Him being with a, quote, morally questionable woman, yeah, we know this already. This is even in the cartoon. So what are you talking about? It just seems that he has a certain construct of Spider-Man and is using that construct he has in his head against the film, and that's perfectly fine if that was legitimately in the film, but it's not. At certain points, it's clearly not in the film. It's something that you've invented in your head and using it as a false standard to say the film should be denigrated. Now, I agree the film should be denigrated, but it should be denigrated on legitimate grounds that internally there are problems with it as well as externally with the canon, but not because I'm just going to invent a phony standard and say MJ bad, therefore Peter Parker bad, therefore movie bad. Even if I think MJ is bad, then we got to be careful because he's done quote bad things and bad things with women and money elsewhere in the comics and the cartoon. That's not going to end the story. We have to look closer at the narrative to see whether it's truly a bad narrative or a truly good narrative, even with the Spider-Man mythos. At least in my humble opinion.